Start of discounts on 4th and 5th subscription levels on my Boosty. You can see all the details at the link in the description under this video. Like the video and write a comment. Enjoy watching. Description: beautiful curls the color of the sun, instantly captivated me. In her smile I saw something pure and fragile, making my heart clench with pain. I am not perfect, not omnipotent, but my knowledge of the future gives me a chance to help her. She will become a hero, a guide to a bright but unknown future, where everyone will follow her. Perhaps my place in her life will remain unclear, but I will be there, even if it means remaining in the shadows, unnoticed. Chapter 9: Meeting Gaara. Time moved forward steadily. Kakashi Sensei did not particularly like his current profession, but he did give some knowledge. This was especially evident after the mission in the Land of Waves. Naruto and Sasuke improved literally before our eyes. Kakashi taught Uchiha how to use his Sharingan, and Uzumaki how to properly manage her huge reserves of chakra. Naruto also now has a couple of wind techniques in his arsenal. He trained Sasuke in the fire element, and began to slowly move on to studying his second style lightning. Well, let's move on to me, so, in short, the basics. Everything. No, I'm not offended. It's fair, when you have one student the only survivor from the clan of a deceased best friend, and the second is the daughter of a respected sensei, then there is simply not enough time and energy for a commoner without a pedigree. That's how any world works. Of course, I would like to be treated equally, to be supported and motivated by sweet speeches about fortitude and the like, but let's be more serious. Kakashi is not going to invest in a person whose goal is to live peacefully in the village. The Hokage is another matter. Or the revival of the clan and the murder of an S-rank criminal. Although, this still does not give the right to a little brat, even if he is the grandson of the third Hokage, to call me a boring bore. You see, it is not proper for such a cool ninja as Naruto, his little sister, to hang around in the company of a puny me. Before Naruto herself had time to react to this, little Sarutobi, who ran away with a couple of friends around the nearest corner, collided with someone from another village. "Brat, do you want to apologize?" Words full of arrogance and contempt were heard. Naruto and I exchanged glances and quickly retreated to the scene. There, as I had already remembered, we came across two peers from another village. A guy with strange makeup and all black clothes, and next to him a beautiful blonde tiredly rubbing the bridge of her nose. The situation escalated when the stranger grabbed Konohamaru by the collar. "You will answer for this," he growled, but Naruto stepped forward, attracting everyone's attention. "Let him go, or you will regret it." There was a threat in her voice. The guy grinned and reached for his doll, but this unfamiliar girl stopped him. "Enough, Kankuro. We are not here to fight." And she turned to us, trying to defuse the situation. "Excuse my brother. We are not looking for trouble." "We are not looking for trouble either, but if you touch anyone from Konoha, you will have to deal with us." I also grew bolder. The brat may be annoying, but I won't let anyone hurt Naruto's little friend. At that moment, as if by script, Sasuke appeared. He silently descended from the roof of the nearest house and stood next to Naruto, his Sharingan sparkling in the sun. "What's going on here?" he asked coldly, looking at the sand ninja. Kankuro let go of Konohamaru, but the tension in the air did not subside. The third stranger also silently climbed in, his voice quiet. "We are not here to fight. But if you provoke us, you better be prepared for the consequences." I shuddered with my whole body. Jinchuriki One-Tailed, prince of the sand village, Gaara. This dead look was terribly tense. His brother and sister almost trembled with fear. Naruto stared at him in a special way. Of course, she felt a familiar aura. "What is your name?" The question sounded unexpectedly. "Uchiha Sasuke." He answered the look. The dead eyes switched to Naruto, behind whose back a frightened Konohamaru was hiding. "I am Uzumaki." "Naruto. And you better remember that name," she said sternly. As expected, he didn't pay attention to me. I was standing a step behind my comrades, and from my memories from the series, I was trying to figure out the rest of the genin hiding in the shadows. I'm Sabaka no Gaara. We'll definitely meet again, Naruto and Sasuke. He grinned creepily, gesturing for his frightened relatives to follow him. After such a tense meeting, the three of us arrived at the gathering place to Kakashi-sensei. He had already told us about the reason for the presence of such genin on Konoha territory, and naturally asked if we were ready to fight them in the upcoming exam. The test to become Chunin. I remember that it was then that the main events in the history of this generation began. Orochimaru, the murder of the third, the crazy Sasuke, and so on down the slope. Sensei asked us to come to the academy grounds tomorrow if we wanted to participate. He gave us the registration forms and asked us to fill them out and hand them into the Hokage's office first. After Kakashi left, having freed us from training today, Sasuke then apologized to Naruto and also went to his residence, to train, so to speak. Shrugging her shoulders, Naruto agreed to my suggestion that she also go home and fill out these forms, otherwise we'll forget. And so, with some warm green tea I brewed and a couple of fresh pieces of cake from a nearby bakery, we finished with the written formalities. Hey Aki, do you think Gaara is also? Naruto suddenly changed the subject, staring at her empty mug with some apathy. Well, apparently it would be a bit of a shock for her to meet someone similar to herself. Especially someone like Gaara, who embodies all the saddest things for a 13-year-old child. Yeah, I think he's a Jinchuriki too. I would like to answer more confidently, but I can't throw around my knowledge about the near future and the main characters there too openly. Fortunately, I recently discovered one feature that allows me to justify my statements. I felt his dark chakra. It really seems to be alive, and there is a lot of it. I am also a sensor now, a very useful ability. Nodding gloomily at my answers, Naruto smiled sadly at some of her inner thoughts. I think I am no longer an assistant here. There are things she will have to come to terms with and accept without my direct participation. Realize that sometimes she will have to clearly look at some unflattering things. Naruto, do you think you can punch Sasuke in the face at this exam and take the Chunin vest for yourself? I cheerfully changed the topic, prompting the blonde to stare at me in surprise, of course. A moment later she was already grinning broadly and in her style began to babble about how she would not sense the self-confident Uchiha. Looking with affection at this strong, transformed girl, occasionally not ceasing to hum affirmatively when she asked for confirmation of her incredible strength, and in general, that she would definitely win the tournament, I thought to myself that she had matured a lot since our first meeting. I don't know if I can change anything, but real tests will follow for both Naruto herself and all of Konoha. I'll need to talk to Gaara sometime, the two of us, without extra ears. It's time to start adjusting some events, sowing seeds of doubt. This will be enough for now. Chapter 10, The First Stage. The Princess's Reflections. Morning. To be more precise, 8 o'clock. The designated meeting place was on the 3rd floor of the academy, room number 303. After several months that flew by like years, we returned here. Personally, I was not overcome by a feeling of nostalgia, rather, it was a warm feeling from the familiar corridors. My comrades, Kiba Inuzuka and Shino Aburame, were complete opposites in terms of character and emotions. The Inuzuka heir tried to influence those around him with strange facial expressions and casually shouted phrases, calculated to provoke. Most likely, this is his personal way to overcome the excitement and uncertainty in connection with the upcoming exam. As for my second team member, the heir of the Honorable Aburame clan, his barely translucent face was a stone mask. Apart from a greeting when we met, nothing came out of his mouth. Our sensei recently became Jonin, but has already proven herself to be an excellent teacher. She manages to keep the three of us in harmony and, due to our abilities complementing each other, build a favorable atmosphere in the team. On the 2nd floor, having passed through a simple genjutsu, we encountered 2 teams, among which there were many familiar faces. The central figures were Uchiha and Niji's cousin's teammate. His name is Rock Lee, if I'm not mistaken. Uchiha's comrade, Naruto, tried to intervene in their stupid argument, which was disgracing our village in front of other nations. Uzumaki. My gaze automatically began to search for the most interesting person among them. It was not difficult to notice him. As expected, he stood to the side, with a slightly apathetic expression on his face, ready to intervene if anything happened. Aki is an orphan and perhaps the strangest person I have ever met. At first glance, he is the embodiment of ordinariness, unremarkable appearance, no outstanding abilities. Everything that I learned about him during his first years at the academy came down to his boundless affection for Uzumaki and impressive theoretical knowledge. Although Uzumaki herself was not far off either, if you pay due attention, then Naruko's no less devotion to this boy is quite noticeable. Always an optimistic blonde, she was especially cruel in sparring with a classmate who once laughed at Aki in class, something about a pet for his mistress. Obviously, they were talking about his only friend. She kept silent then, but later, during a sparring match, she had to be dragged away from the defeated boy on a spar. He was sobbing and snot-sniffling blood, and she looked at him with an icy expression. Aki himself missed it all, having previously gone to the infirmary after his own friendly duel. Such jokes ceased after that. However, all of this paled in comparison to that unfortunate incident between us, which happened through my fault. At some point, I began to get tired of maintaining my image, being cold and lonely was becoming difficult. Uchiha had changed a lot after the tragedy with his clan, and I sincerely sympathized with his grief. But this did not mean that I desired his friendship, which cannot be said about several stupid fans. Pathetic semblance of future kunoichi expressed their opinion when I did not hang around their idol and wipe his snot like the rest of the village. Usually, I was not affected by the words of little fools, but that day, circumstances developed in such a way that all this led me to an isolated area on the academy grounds. There we ran into Aki. He found me crying and weak, unacceptable behavior for the heiress of the great Hyuga clan. I was very confused at the moment, but after his own shock from the sight, he hurried to insist on taking me to the teachers or helping me to the medical center. I, being stressed from yet another problem that seemed to have befallen me, burst into tears even more. Of course, it is very embarrassing to remember this. Aki, to his credit, did exactly what I least expected then. He awkwardly began to stroke my head. I was already ready to use especially cruel techniques of my clan Juken on him, when I noticed his gaze. So innocent, understanding and warm. I immediately remembered my mother, she did the same, always saved me from sadness. Spontaneously, I decided to weaken my will, break down in front of him, finally share my hardships. I was too tired of being alone. He listened and called me amazing. He said that he could not remain so strong, assured that feeling alone is not weakness, but a normal feeling. He shared his own experiences, his hopeless love for his best friend, his envy of her new friends. It was sobering to learn so much about someone, to share my weakness with someone. It took me a while to realize how noble Aki had been. I had never been nice to him during those insignificant periods of our interaction, yet he had comforted me and selflessly helped me through it. I began to watch him more often then, to notice all the little things about him, his incredible support, especially for Naruto. Because of our social hierarchy, I can't claim much. There are too many risks and problems that he doesn't deserve to have for the sake of my selfish desires. And yet, sitting next to him at the same desk, on this important exam for us. Looking at his determined expression, those short worried glances at a certain blonde, a strange feeling of determination burned inside me. I don't know how the stars will align and the circumstances will turn out, and it's unlikely that this will actually happen, however, if in the future my hands are untied and these feelings continue to live deep inside me, I will definitely save you, Aki. This is my promise. It is a little bitter to realize that his thoughts are completely filled with another person. Oh, I went too far with my desires. And yet, if the future does not bring him the happiness and peace he deserves, I will be there. If you agree to answer the last, 10th question, and fail it, you will never again be able to claim the title of Chunin. Aki did not answer a single question. My raised eyebrow at his carelessness about the situation was met with a confident smile and a nod. And now, when this test of resolve is happening, I can't shake the feeling that he foresaw this turn of events. Under the oppressive atmosphere and the teams leaving one after another, I was attracted by Naruto's raised hand. My attention immediately switched to my deskmate, and that happy grin of his answered most of the questions. After Naruto's short but impressive speech, no one else wanted to leave. So you passed. Chapter 11: Forest of Death. As we approached the enormous steel gates that led to the Forest of Death, I watched the people around me. More specifically, I watched Naruto and her genuine smile as she joked with Aki, reminding me that my place next to her was already taken. Not entirely, of course, but enough to leave a strange feeling of emptiness. I turned my gaze to Aki. This guy didn't stand out. Plain clothes, average height, a face that was difficult to discern anything special, and an absolute lack of what could be called greatness. His combat training also left much to be desired. But for some reason, it was he, and not me, who was always by Naruto's side. And it didn't matter how much I trained, how many times I won in sparring matches and earned the respect of those around me. She still. No, I had to get this irritation out of my head. Now was not the time. Kakashi-sensei came closer, interrupting my train of thought. His impassive face brightened slightly as he gave his final instructions before the stage began. Remember, he said in his usual lazy voice, there are dangers at every turn in this forest. Your goal is to obtain the second scroll and survive until the allotted time. The main rule is to not open the scrolls until the task is completed. Naruto nodded with a seriousness that was not often characteristic of her and replied, we can do it. Right, guys? She turned to us, and her blue eyes met mine. I wanted to say something, but Aki beat me to it. Of course we can. We are a team after all. His words sounded sincere, as always. Even being annoyed with him was pointless. But inside, everything was boiling. Why was he so calm? How did he manage to be near her, as if it were the most natural thing in the world? As we entered the forest, it became clear that this task was not a walk through the training grounds. The air was heavy and humid, the smell of earth and rot filled the space. The sounds of wild animals came from all directions, and subtle movements could be seen in the shadows of the trees. Naruto walked ahead, waving her arms as if trying to disperse the tension that had gripped the three of us. I walked behind, covering the group, although every glance in Aki's direction made me want to break ranks and check if he could even protect Naruto if something happened. You're too quiet, Sasuke, she said suddenly, turning to me. Is something wrong? I wanted to say that everything was fine, but her eyes seemed to shine through me. It was strange. It was hard to imagine that she was able to see my doubts when she herself was so simple. Just focus, I answered shortly. Naruto smiled. That's the right attitude. Go ahead, Mr. Uchiha, do us all a favor and scan the area with your Sharingan. Aki, cover him. I felt a jolt of jealousy again. Why him? I should be her first line of defense. But she said it with such genuine concern that there was no point in arguing. Our first fight was with the Amigekure team. Their attack was unexpected, but our combined efforts quickly yielded results. Aki used his wits, distracting the enemy with traps and smoke, while Naruto smashed them with all her might. Of course, I dealt with the leader of the group, but Naruto's eyes were glued to Aki. She praised him because he saved her from the explosion, or rather, tried to do so, and shouted to her about the danger, after which she managed to run away. I just stood to the side, feeling it gnawing at me from the inside. After all, I could have done the same. If only she would look at me the way she looked at him. At night, by the fire, I continued to watch them. What am I doing wrong? Why is it so hard for me to express how I feel? Perhaps because these feelings were not fully understood even by myself. The only thing I knew for sure was that I could not let Naruto leave me. She had to be mine. Not for the clan, not for revenge, for me. It was with this realization that I stood up, moving closer to the fire. Naruto, we have to be more careful tomorrow, I said, interrupting their conversation. Aki, you too. Don't distract her with stupid jokes. They both froze, staring at me in surprise. Naruto frowned. Sasuke, relax. We are a team. Or are you forgetting? She said it warmly, but as if I were just another student at the academy who needed her indulgence. I nodded, but inside I decided, the next day, I would make sure Naruto noticed. Noticed only me. POV Aki. A little earlier. The forest of death lived up to its name. Dark, unnaturally twisted trees, damp, fear-filled air, and the constant feeling that someone was watching. It was too quiet here, unnatural for such a dense forest. Even the rustling of the wind seemed threatening. I looked around, trying to stay close to Naruto and Sasuke. She walked ahead, confidently pushing aside the branches. Even in this gloomy place, her golden hair was like a beacon that was hard to look away from. Naruto said something about tactics, and I nodded automatically, trying to focus on the task at hand. But only one thought was spinning in my head. What am I doing here? When I first came to this world, my knowledge of Naruto seemed something incredible. The ability to foresee the future was a great gift, until I realized that none of this is a game at all. Here, every day could be your last, and every choice you make is a step towards life or death. Naruto was a light in this dark world, a reminder that even in cruelty there can be kindness. I promised myself to be by her side. And to this day, that promise is the only thing that keeps me going. But how long can I keep going? Naruto and Sasuke moved forward, their movements light and precise. I, on the other hand, made noise, clinging to roots and stumbling from time to time. Both of them glanced back from time to time, checking to see if I was falling behind. Naruto sometimes stopped to wait, and Sasuke, on the contrary, walked forward, sometimes throwing an irritated look over his shoulder. If you can't go faster, just don't get in the way. His words cut me. Of course he was right. Sasuke was a genius, the heir of the Uchiha clan, the last bearer of a great bloodline, well, in Konoha the last. His strength and talent were obvious, even if I hadn't known what he would become. And Naruto. She glows from within. Her energy and kindness make her the center of our team. She is the one who leads us, not Sasuke, despite all his ambitions. She inspires, motivates, makes us go further. And me? I can't even hold a kunai in my hands confidently. We ran into a team from Amagekure. The fight was fast, but chaotic. I did my best to support Naruto and Sasuke, but my attacks were just a distraction. When the fight was over and we took the scroll, Sasuke barely glanced in my direction. You need to be more careful, he said coldly. You're too slow. I remained silent. What could I say to him? He was right. Naruto immediately came to me, checking if I was hurt. Her touch, her care, it was more than I deserved. It's okay, Naru, I said, looking away. I'm fine. She smiled and squeezed my shoulder. For her, it was a simple gesture of support. For me, it was a reminder of why I was here. Sasuke had already left to get firewood. It was already evening, sitting by the fire, watching Naruto and Sasuke discuss tactics. Before that, Uchiha had reproached me for not taking the exam seriously, but Naruto, as usual, had nipped the emerging conflict in the bud. Now these two were speaking a language that I did not fully understand. Their experience, their skills, it was something I would never be able to achieve. I could only sit next to them and hope that my role in this story was to be there for Naruto when she needed someone who did not see her as a weapon. Just a friend. Even that. But deep down, I knew that it was not enough. The next day, we set out again. And then it happened. When she appeared, none of us noticed her at first. She was a girl with long black hair and a sly, wary look. She had the hidden sound headband on her forehead. If I hadn't known who she was beforehand, I would never have guessed the true identity of the person standing before us. How interesting, she said, as if assessing us. Her voice was soft, but there was danger hidden behind it. Who are you? Naruto asked sharply, clutching her kunai. A simple kunoichi undergoing an exam, she answered with a mysterious smile. And you are Team 7, right? Something about her presence was wrong. The sense of danger intensified. My hand reflexively reached for my weapon, but my fingers trembled traitorously. Sasuke had already activated his Sharingan, his gaze riveted to the girl. He stepped forward, covering us. "What do you want?" he asked coldly. Her smile grew wider, and the next moment it was gone. Before I could even blink, the girl was behind Sasuke. Her kunai was at his neck. "So young, so talented," she whispered. "Especially you, Uchiha. But you are not ready for your destiny yet." Sasuke reacted instantly, breaking free of her grip and attacking. But her movements were too fast, too precise. This was no ordinary opponent, but someone whose strength was far greater than ours. The fight lasted only a few minutes, but it felt like hours. Naruto rushed at her, using the shadow clone technique. She surrounded the enemy, attacking from all sides, but the girl only laughed and dealt with them with ease. Sasuke and Naruto fought with all their might, and I tried to find a way to help. But what could I do against such an enemy? All my knowledge of this world seemed useless when it came to a real fight. And then she revealed herself. The moment Sasuke released another fire technique, the girl dropped her pretense. Her appearance changed, and a tall, snake-like man appeared before us. His eyes were yellow with vertical pupils, and his smile was frightening. "Orochimaru," I whispered, feeling my blood run cold. Orochimaru acted coldly and methodically. He blocked the chakra Naruto, leaving her helpless, immobilized her with one movement. Her body went limp and she fell to the ground. "Naruto!" I screamed, rushing towards her, but was stopped. Orochimaru turned to me, his eyes narrowed. "Who are you, boy?" he asked. "You don't look like a shinobi. And yet, there is something strange about you." My legs buckled in fear. He didn't just notice me, he decided that I was worthy of attention. He began, stuttering. "I am part of this team." Orochimaru chuckled, clearly amused by my fear. "I'm surprised they even accepted you into the team. But tell me, what are you willing to do to protect them?" I remained silent. The answer was obvious. I will do anything. While Orochimaru was enjoying his superiority, he activated his technique. I watched as he placed the curse seal on Sasuke's neck. My friend's scream echoed through the forest, making me cringe in frustration. When it was over, Sasuke had fallen unconscious. Naruto lay next to him, also lifeless. Only I was left standing in front of this monster. "Interesting," Orochimaru muttered, coming closer to me. "There is something unusual about you. You are afraid, but you stand. And you know something that I do not." I clenched my fists, gathering the last of my courage. I know what you want," I forced out. "And if you leave them, I will tell you." His eyes narrowed, and his gaze seemed to pierce through me. "Well, boy, that sounds intriguing. But I'm afraid I have no more need of you. Your friends have already received what I wanted to give them." He walked away, and his body disappeared, dissolving into thin air. When I was sure that he was really gone, my legs gave way and I fell to my knees. My body was shaking, I couldn't speak or move. Naruto and Sasuke were still unconscious. Chapter 12 Deep Wounds. The forest of death was still. There was no sound left except for my heavy breathing and the rhythmic beating of my heart. The ground beneath me felt cold, uneven, its damp smell mixing with the acrid scent of blood. Naruto and Sasuke lay unconscious, their bodies motionless, their faces pale. I raised my trembling hand and clenched my fist. The pain in my chest was sharp, throbbing, but it was incomparable to what was happening inside. Useless. The word was firmly lodged in my head, as if I had carved it there myself. When Orochimaru disappeared, leaving us in the silent chaos, I realized that I had no right to simply sit. I went to Naruto first. She was breathing, the weak but steady movement of her chest the only sign of life. I knelt down next to her, carefully lifting her head. On her stomach, where the QB seal should have been, there was a pattern unfamiliar to me. His face was bruised and there were bloody wounds on his body. He had sealed her chakra and I had no idea what to do with it. I laid Naruto down next to the tree, placing her head on my jacket. Then I turned to Sasuke. His face was twisted in pain even in his unconscious state. A dark, ominous mark was pulsing on his neck. I had heard of curse seals, but seeing it in reality was something else entirely. His body was shaking, as if he was fighting something inside himself. I reached out, trying to hold him back from hurting himself. "Sasuke," I whispered, knowing that I would not be heard. The minutes dragged on like hours. I sat between them, ready to protect them if someone showed up. But who was I kidding? What could I do if the one who attacked was even a tenth as strong as Orochimaru? My hands were shaking and I was trying hard not to lose control of myself. I thought about Naruto. About her laugh. About how she was always kind to me. I wasn't worth it. I remembered her look, full of determination, when she threw herself at Orochimaru, trying to protect us. She always puts others before herself. Believes in people, even if they don't deserve it. And Sasuke. I couldn't understand him. That harshness, that coldness. But he fought to protect Naruto. Even with his arrogance, he never turned away from her in a moment of danger. As for me, I could only watch. After a while, Naruto began to come to her senses. Her eyes slowly opened, and the first thing she did was try to stand up. "Naruto, don't." I quickly put my hands on her shoulders, trying to calm her down. "You're hurt. Where is Sasuke?" Her voice was weak, but her eyes darted around until they found him. "He's here. Alive. But..." I didn't know what to say. She understood everything herself, seeing the mark on his neck. Her face changed, as if she felt the full weight of what had happened. I could see her lips trembling, but she clenched her fists, suppressing her emotions. "We have to get him out of here," she said, trying to get to her feet. I supported her, although my own legs could barely hold me. We walked a little further, supporting each other. Sasuke had not yet come to his senses, and his weight hung on both of us. Each step was difficult, but Naruto, despite her condition, continued to move forward. She was strong, too strong for a person who had been through so much. Not far away, we found temporary shelter among the roots of a huge tree. "Aki." Her voice tore me out of my thoughts when we finally settled in a new place. "Thank you?" I looked at her, not knowing what to answer. Why was she thanking me? I did nothing. "You were there," she said, as if reading my mind. "That's important." Her words warmed me, but only briefly. I knew the truth. Being there wasn't the same as being useful. Naruto had passed out again next to Sasuke, her hand barely touching his shoulder. I stayed on guard, listening to every sound. My thoughts were haunting me. Why am I here? Why am I continuing? This isn't my fight. I don't have the strength to protect them. Even my knowledge of the future was useless. I might have foreseen Orochimaru's attack, but that didn't help me stop it. All I did was survive. And that didn't save Naruto or Sasuke. I looked at her. Her face, even in her sleep, seemed tired. But she was beautiful. Naruto had always been beautiful. And I knew that no matter what, I would never leave her. Even if it meant always being left behind. For her sake, I would do anything. Ino's POV. The forest of death was like a separate world, hostile, unfriendly, full of threats that could only be felt, but not seen. Every step echoed with the crunch of branches underfoot, every rustle made you tense up. Our team moved carefully. Shikamaru was ahead, lazily calm as always, but his gaze darted from side to side, analyzing every little thing. Choji stayed closer to the center, gnawing on his third bag of chips, which somehow survived the first 2 days. I walked behind, scanning the area. But my thoughts were not only about what was happening around me. I involuntarily thought about the rest of our former classmates, in addition to my own team, who were now fighting for their lives in this forest. Especially one bright and close friend. Naruto. Her face was in front of me all the time. This restless and infinitely kind girl, who became my closest friend. I knew she could take care of herself, I knew she was strong. But this situation. Something was bothering me. Naruto and I always shared everything, but her habit of taking everything on herself sometimes just drove me crazy. She could be naive, and she could underestimate the danger, especially when it came to her friends. Although, there was someone whose care for Naruto was the highest priority. At first glance, nothing remarkable, but his gaze always intrigued me. Dad taught me that it is the eyes that can tell a lot about someone. I blinked, looking around again, trying to keep everything in sight. This guy, Aki, he was always by Naruto's side. Ever since they were little. I remember how he helped her learn to read, how he protected her from the harsh words of her classmates. He was not just a friend, he was irreplaceable. I know that Naruto adores him. She trusts him like no one else. But was it love? Usually, we weren't shy about discussing some pretty personal topics with her, although Naruto it was always difficult to squeeze out something. However, despite my crazy interest, something prevented me from asking about her relationship with Aki. As if it was unknown territory. I allowed myself only light hints and jokes. But it was not difficult to guess about Aki's feelings. I always saw it. He was in love with Naruto. Selflessly, deeply. And yet he never tried to show it openly. He knew his place. Perhaps he thought that Naruto would never look at him the way he looked at her. But he continued to be there. Helped her. Cared for her. Without expecting gratitude. Ino, are you even listening? Shikamaru's lazy voice tore me out of my memories. I blinked, concentrating on the present again. Shikamaru stopped and pointed ahead. Something is happening there. Do you hear it? And I did hear it, the sounds of battle. Metal hitting metal. It wasn't far away. We approached closer, trying not to make any noise. The scene before us was the one I least expected to see. Aki was fighting against 3 sound shinobi. At first glance, it seemed absurd. They were stronger, more experienced. But he didn't give up. Even when his blows seemed useless, even when blood was flowing down his wounds, he continued to stand. Not far away, under a large tree, Naruto was lying. I saw her wounds, her pale face, and my heart sank. Sasuke was nearby too, motionless. But suddenly his body twitched and moved. And the next moment, he stood up. Something was wrong. A strange mark was darkening on his neck, pulsating with an ominous light and like roots, capturing his entire body. Sasuke lifted his head, his eyes blazing with excitement. I feel power, he said. His voice was cold as steel. Then, his gaze caught on the unconscious Naruto. And then, he rushed into battle. His movements were wild and human. He threw one of the shinobi into a tree with such force that he fell unconscious. He grabbed the other one by the arms. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Sasuke squeezed his wrists so hard that I heard bones crack. Sasuke, stop! I screamed, but he didn't even turn around. We need to intervene, Shikamaru muttered, grabbing my arm. If he continues, he'll kill them. We jumped out of hiding. Shikamaru quickly used his shadow technique, immobilizing Sasuke. He resisted, but not for long. His strength quickly faded, and he passed out again. I ran to him, kneeling down. His face was tense even in his unconscious state. I gently brushed the hair from his forehead, checking to see if he was breathing. It's okay, I said, more to myself than to the others. Shikamaru was there too, nodding at this. Aki knelt down next to Naruto. His hands were still shaking. He was whispering something to her, but I couldn't hear the words. What happened here? Shikamaru asked. Aki looked at him, and there was so much pain and fatigue in his eyes that I felt sorry for him. He began to explain about Orochimaru's attack, about how he tried to protect his friends. His voice was even, but there was a hint of guilt in it. I looked at Aki, then at Naruto and Sasuke. They were part of something bigger. Their lives were intertwined, their destinies were linked. Sasuke was my weak point. I loved him, even though he barely noticed me. Naruto was my best friend. And Aki. I still didn't know how to feel about him. But one thing was for sure, he was the most important person to Naruto. Aki's POV when Naruto stirred, I noticed it right away. Her breathing deepened slightly, and her eyelids fluttered before she slowly opened her eyes. Her first move was to try to sit up, but I gently placed my hand on her shoulder, holding her back. "Hush, Naru," I said, trying to sound calm. "You're not recovered yet." Her blue eyes met mine, full of worry and pain. For a moment, she looked confused, but then she remembered everything. "Sasuke!" she cried, her voice shaking with panic. She turned sharply to find him with her eyes. "He's okay," I quickly assured her, though my words didn't sound as confident as I'd hoped. "He's unconscious, but he's breathing." Ino checked him. She relaxed a little, but her face remained tense. I carefully examined her treated wounds, afraid to see fresh blood under the bandages. "What about you?" she asked, turning her gaze to me. "Are you okay?" The question hit harder than I expected. I wanted to tell the truth, that I felt worthless and weak, but instead I nodded, smiling. "Yes. I did it." Her lips twitched, but she didn't smile back. She raised her hand, touching her stomach where the seal had been. "I feel empty," she whispered. "He sealed the chakra." QB. I didn't say anything, I just covered her hand with mine. I didn't know how to comfort her. All I could do was be there. Naruto soon insisted that we keep moving. She was too stubborn to stay helpless. We teamed up with Team 8. The two best friends often exchanged quiet words, and I saw Ino trying to comfort her, although her gaze also lingered on Sasuke. Choji carried the Uchiha with ease. Shikamaru walked ahead, planning a route to avoid collisions with the other teams. And me. I walked slightly behind Naruto, trying to be her support. When the tower finally appeared in the distance, the tension in the group eased slightly. We had made it, although each of us was exhausted. Upon reaching the courtyard, each team took out their scrolls. "Are you ready?" I asked Naruto, holding up my scroll. She nodded, and we turned them around at the same time. Light filled the space, and our senseis appeared in front of us. Kakashi, as always, looked relaxed, but his gaze immediately became serious when he saw the state of Sasuke and Naruto. Later, we stood in a separate room of the tower with the third Hokage. Sasuke was still unconscious, he was taken away by Kakashi. Naruto stayed close to me, although her shoulders were slumped and her face was pale. "Tell me, Aki," the Hokage said, his voice firm but not harsh. I took a deep breath and began the story. About our encounter with the girl, from sound, about her true identity, about how she blocked the chakra. Naruto put the mark on Sasuke. "She introduced herself as Orochimaru," I finished, feeling my voice shaking. "It was him, I'm sure." The Hokage looked worried. But he only listened to the story in silence. "We'll take care of Sasuke's mark," he said. "And Naruto, you should rest, maybe you should go home?" But Naruto perked up. "Hokage-sama, I can continue the exam." Her voice was firm, but her hands were shaking. I wanted to object, but her gaze stopped me. She was determined, and I knew that no words would stop her. Later, we returned to our rooms, where we had to wait for the next stage of the exam. Naruto was sitting on the bed. "Everything will be fine," I said quietly, sitting down next to her. She turned to me, her eyes shining with tears. "You always say that, Aki." I smiled, even though I felt broken inside. "Because I believe in it." She gently buried her face in my shoulder. Chapter 13 Conversations with Shadows. We spent most of the first day together. Naruto had arranged our small room to make it feel at least a little cozier, putting her jacket on the table as a tablecloth and placing little mementos we'd collected during our travels in the corner. Sasuke was still in the isolated medical wing. The medic said the curse seal needed time to stabilize. His absence felt strangely empty, even if I knew he hardly missed our company. Naruto tried not to show her concern, but I knew she was worried. I could tell by the way she tried to get up and check on Sasuke at least 20 times that day. Naru, give him some time, I said as she began putting on her shoes yet again. He needs to recover. She paused, looking at me, but said nothing. She just sat back down on the bed, her fingers running through her golden hair. I just want to make sure he's okay, she murmured quietly. I wanted to tell her that she didn't need to worry, that he could handle it. But that would be a lie. I was worried about him too, even if he was irritated with me. He was important to Naruto, which meant he was important to me too. That evening, I decided to take a short walk to distract myself. Naruto had fallen asleep right on the table, exhausted from worrying, and I didn't want to wake her. The tower was dark and almost empty. All the teams were busy with restoration or their own affairs, and it seemed to me that I was the only one who decided to wander the corridors. But I soon realized that I was wrong. Gaara was standing by the window, looking out at the night. His gaze was focused on the moon, but the expression on his face. I had seen it before. It was the same pain as in Naruto's eyes. A lonely, exhausted, and depressed look. It made me stop. You're not sleeping either? I blurted out, and I immediately regretted it. Gaara turned around. His gaze was cold and wary. What do you want? He asked, his voice a hiss. I wanted to leave, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the same pain in his eyes that Naruto had. Maybe it was the feeling that I had to say something. You look tired, I said carefully, stepping closer. His eyes narrowed, and I felt the air around me grow heavier. What do you want to play? His voice was filled with irritation. I sighed. No. It's just. I know what it's like to be alone. He laughed, but there was no joy in his laughter. Only bitterness. Alone? You don't know anything. He stepped closer, and I felt his ominous aura envelop me. You have no idea what it's like to be me. I knew I'd gone too far, but I couldn't stop myself. You think I don't understand? My voice suddenly grew stronger. Naruto, she's going through the same thing you are. I've seen her suffer, shunned, hated. I've seen her tears, her pain. She's like you. Gaara stopped. His face was momentarily confused, but then anger flared within him. Shut up! He shouted, and the air around him exploded. You don't know anything! No one knows! His sand stirred, filling the space. I stepped back, but I didn't get far. Gaara came closer, his eyes blazing with hatred. You better pray we don't meet in the arena, he hissed. Because then you won't be able to say another word. And with that, he disappeared, leaving me alone. When I returned, Naruto was no longer asleep. She was sitting on the bed, hugging her knees, staring into space. I gently closed the door and sat down next to her. Can't sleep? She shook her head in response. I'm afraid we can't do this, she said quietly, lowering her head. I felt my heart squeeze. You know that's not true, I said, trying to sound confident. We can do this. You always have. But it's different now. She looked up, her eyes full of tears. That seal. Sasuke. I can't help him. I couldn't protect you. I interrupted her, taking her hand. Naruto, listen to me. You're the strongest I know. You've already done more than most could. But you can't do it all alone. She looked at me, and I saw her lips tremble. Then she nodded, squeezing my hand tighter. Thank you, Aki, she whispered, gently stroking my hand with hers. Sasuke returned the next day. He looked exhausted, but his eyes were as stubborn as ever. He glanced quickly at Naruto, who immediately ran up to him and carefully examined him for external wounds. The Uchiha was a little embarrassed by such pressure, but did not interfere in any way. Sasuke, are you okay? Her voice was trembling. He nodded briefly, his gaze darting to me. And then, his face distorted in irritation when Naruto moved away and relaxedly sat down next to me on the bed. You, as always, are here, he said coldly. I held back a sigh. I'm just doing what I can. He answered him calmly. Sasuke snorted, but said nothing. His anger seemed to be directed at the entire situation as a whole. Later, especially Naruto, who had seemed more focused since the morning. Her energy had returned, although traces of anxiety could be seen on her face. Sasuke looked even more detached than usual. The silence and abrupt movements emanating from him spoke of an internal conflict that he was trying to hide. Perhaps this damned seal was tormenting him. When we were finally gathered in the hall, all eyes were directed at the chief examiner, Hate Gecko. His voice was hoarse, but it didn't stop him from speaking confidently. The third round will consist of individual fights, he announced. However, due to the large number of participants, a preliminary tournament will be held. Those who pass it will be able to participate in the main round. My hand clenched into a fist. Individual fights. That meant Naruto and Sasuke would be fighting without support. And me? I wasn't strong enough to count on anything more, but I still hoped I could hold out. When the screen began scrolling through the names, I froze, watching it. The first fight was between Sasuke and one of the Sound Shinobi. Sasuke entered the arena with icy calm, but his tension was visible. I watched him fight. His movements were sharp, aggressive, almost uncontrollable. The curse seal seemed active, although he tried to suppress its influence. The opponent, a guy from Sound named Yoroi, tried to absorb his chakra, but Sasuke was faster. He can handle it, Naruto whispered, standing next to me. I just nodded. And Kakashi-sensei watched silently, without commenting on anything. In the end, Sasuke finished the fight with a powerful blow after some combination, but he barely managed to stay on his feet. His breathing was heavy, and I noticed how he staggered slightly. The curse seal continued to affect him, draining his strength. I felt relieved when the medics took him away from the arena. When Naruto's name appeared on the screen, her eyes flashed. She glanced at me and Kakashi-sensei before stepping forward. Good luck, Naru, I said, but she was too focused to respond. Her opponent was Kiba Inuzuka. They exchanged quick words before the fight began, and Kiba was clearly confident in himself and the outcome of the fight. However, Naruto was not going to give in. Her movements were swift. The shadow clone technique coupled with her wits helped to deceive Kiba and deliver the decisive blow. I knew she could do it. Ino smiled, standing nearby. I understood this too, but it was still very difficult for Naruto. Her chakra was limited due to Orochimaru's seal, and she relied on strategy more than strength. It was impressive, but also worrying. If someone more skillful or cunning had come across, everything could have ended much worse. From then on, almost all the other fights followed the canon I knew. Of course, there were a couple of exceptions. And if Shikamaru defeated the Kunoichi from Sound, and Niji barely dealt with Hinata. So Ino was actually able to defeat Tenten, but she managed to release a combined technique with weapons and bring the match to a draw. Gaara and Rock Lee put on quite a show. I sincerely admired Lee's tenacity. He really is a fantastic guy. But then, the inevitable happened. When the screen flashed my name, I froze. My opponent was Temari, the Princess of the Sand. Her calm confidence and giant fan immediately made it clear that this fight would be difficult. I walked up to the arena, feeling my legs buckle slightly. Temari smiled. You have to be kidding, she said, looking me over. What are you going to do? The fight began, and her attacks were powerful and deadly. Her wind tore through the ground, throwing me back. But I couldn't just give up. I used everything I knew to dodge, set traps, and distract her. But everything seemed pointless. I had no hidden skills, no trump cards, and therefore all my efforts were shattered by her wind technique, and on top of that, she managed to hurt me badly several times. At some point I still managed to hurt her, but this only angered Temari even more. Her last attack knocked me down, and I heard Hate announce Temari's victory. You survived, she said, passing by me. That's already an achievement. I got up from the ground, feeling pain in every muscle. I almost felt sick, my body ached terribly. I did everything I could. When we returned to our rooms, Naruto was next to me. Until now, she said nothing. But now, she just looked at me with warmth, which made the pain subside a little. You did well, Aki, she consoled. You held on until the end. I smiled, but inside myself I felt empty again. I couldn't reach the final stage. And all I could do was continue to be there for Naruto and Sasuke, supporting them as best I could. Chapter 14 Training and the Third Stage. After the preliminary round of the Chunin exams, the tower was once again plunged into anticipation. The winners were preparing for the main round, and the losers were healing their wounds and leaving the arena. I was among those who dropped out. The pain of defeat receded, leaving a strange emptiness, because deep down I knew that I was unlikely to be lucky enough to win. Now I needed to focus on what was really important: Naruto and Sasuke. The next day, I was called to the third Hokage's office. I had no idea why the village's oldest leader needed me, but the feeling of anxiety grew with every step down the hallway. When I entered, the Hokage was sitting behind his massive desk, with Kakashi and Irika standing next to him. "Sit down, Aki," the Hokage said in a warm but serious tone. I sat down, feeling my palms begin to sweat. Sarutobi looked at me carefully. "Tell me what you think about Sasuke's curse seal and the chakra blocking." "Naruto?" I tensed up, but still answered honestly. "It's a huge threat. Orochimaru is stronger than we can imagine. And I'm afraid that everything we do is not enough." The Hokage nodded, sighing. "We can't let those fears get the better of us. You must continue to support Naruto. She values you more than you think." Those words suddenly burned me. I knew that Naruto valued me, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was just a weak shadow next to her. I nodded but said nothing. Then they extracted all the information they could from me about the incident with Orochimaru, her fake appearance, maybe a casually thrown out phrase from him. They squeezed everything out of me. When the training for the final round began, I noticed that the atmosphere around our team had changed. Kakashi-sensei seemed to be absorbed in thoughts about Sasuke. He'd called him in for individual training without consulting Naruto. She tried to hide her disappointment, but her eyes said it all. She'd spent so much time waiting for training to start, and now that it was time to begin, she was being left out. It didn't seem fair. "Are you okay?" I asked when we were alone. She sighed, looking away. "Yeah, it's just..." She paused for a moment. "Why does Kakashi-sensei always choose Sasuke? He's important, I get that, but I want to get stronger too. I want him to see that I can be strong." Her voice was shaking, and I could see her holding back tears. I covered her hand with mine and said confidently, "You're already strong, Naruto. You inspire everyone around you. Even Kakashi-sensei. It's just, maybe he doesn't know how to show it." Her eyes met mine and she smiled weakly. "Thank you, Aki," she said quietly. "You always know what to say." The next day, I went with Naruto to the center of the village. She said that she needed to find someone to help her train, since Kakashi hadn't come. We didn't know who exactly we were going to look for yet, but fate decided for us. We came across a tall man with long white hair, dressed in a strange red kimono. He was standing on a bridge, doing something with a quill and a scroll. Naruto immediately jumped up to him, waving her arms. "Hey you! You're a shinobi, right? You look strong and experienced. Help me train." Her voice was loud, and people around her started turning around. The man looked up, and his gaze became serious for a moment. Then he laughed, smiling widely. "What a push," he said. "But why would I waste my time on a little girl? I'm not little." Naruto was indignant, clenching her fists. "I'll become Hokage, and you'll be proud that you taught me." The man fell silent, his smile weakening a little. He looked at her with interest, then turned his gaze to me. "And who are you?" he asked. Just a friend," I answered. "A friend, then," he muttered, looking at Naruto again. "Well, let's see what you're capable of. Show me what you can do." Jiraiya turned out to be incredibly strange, but his knowledge and skills were impressive. He was a little different from the image conveyed in the canon. He was more serious or something, although sometimes he cast lustful glances at women passing by. But no matter, he immediately noticed that the chakra Naruto blocked it, and started working on removing Orochimaru's seal. Naruto looked at him with respect, almost awe, and it made me feel strange, like I was unwanted. But I stayed by his side anyway. When the training was over, Naruto looked tired but happy. "Thank you, Jiraiya-sensei," she said, smiling. "Sensei?" He raised an eyebrow, but didn't object. "Okay, girl. You're capable. Let's see what happens." I looked at them, feeling a mixture of joy for her and a little sadness. Jiraiya clearly saw her as more than just a student. She was getting stronger. I don't think he could ever refuse her. Sometimes a shadow of nostalgia and tenderness flashed in his eyes when he watched Naruto. And me? I continued to be the one who just walked by. Training with Jiraiya continued after their first meeting. The man could be strange, loud, and often downright unbearable. But Naruto didn't seem to mind. On the contrary, her enthusiasm only grew stronger with each passing day. Jiraiya turned out to be a true master, and in a short time she learned what had previously seemed unattainable to her. I tried to be there, help her recover after training, bring her water, or just support her. But every time I looked at them, I felt a strange feeling growing inside me. It was a mixture of pride for her and bitterness from the realization that I would never be able to be at her level. One day, I plucked up my courage and approached Jiraiya when Naruto was not around. He was sitting on a rock, studying something in his notebook, and barely glanced at me when I spoke. Jiraiya-sama? I began, feeling my voice treacherous. "Could you help me too?" He finally looked up and looked me over. "You?" His voice was surprised, but not mocking. "Do you want to train?" "Yes," I answered quickly, trying to sound confident. "I want to get stronger so I can be useful." He was silent for a long moment, then sighed heavily and put the notebook back in his pocket. "Listen," he said, his voice softening. "You're a good guy. But you don't have what Naruto has. You can be there for her, support her, but true strength only comes to those who have something special. Do you understand?" His words hit me like a punch. I didn't argue. I just nodded and said, "I understand. Thank you." When Naruto returned, she asked what I'd been doing. I smiled and lied. "Nothing. It's fine." She smiled back, which is what matters most to me. Her happiness. Her confidence. Naruto's attention was focused on her opponent Neji Hyuga. She studied everything she knew about him and tried to figure out how to counter his Juken technique. More precisely, their clan's signature technique. "He's strong," she said one evening, waving her arms as if trying to explain it to herself. "But I have to win." I just nodded, knowing that words were unnecessary. Her energy and determination spoke for themselves. Sasuke, on the other hand, was silent and distant. We rarely saw each other, meeting once a week at Ichiraku's. His opponent, Gaara, was something of a challenge to him. Their fight promised to be brutal. I knew that the Jinchuriki Shikaku was no easy opponent. His malice could destroy everything in his path. And so, every day became a test for me. Jiraiya's words echoed in my head. True strength only comes to those with something special. I had nothing. No talent, no strength, no unique abilities. All I could offer was my support. But it seemed that it was not enough. Naruto continued to train with Jiraiya, becoming stronger with each passing day. Sasuke was going through his own trials, struggling with the cursed seal and his inner demons. And I stayed where I was, simply observing. I tried to hide my feelings, but it was becoming increasingly difficult. At night, I asked myself the same question. Why am I here? When the day came for the final round of the exam, the atmosphere in the village was filled with anticipation. It seemed like the morning had come too quickly. Birds chirped outside the window, but their loud voices couldn't penetrate the thick curtain of tension that hung over the air. Today was the day of the final round of the Chunin exams, and the streets of the village were bustling with activity. I woke up before Naruto. She was still asleep, curled up on her bed. The blanket was almost on the floor, the pillow was in a cruel embrace, and her overgrown hair was wreaking golden chaos on the sheets. Still, there was a look of determination on her face, even in her sleep. I knew that this day was important to her, not only because it was a chance to show everyone her strength, but because she wanted to prove to everyone who had ever doubted her that she was worthy of being here. That she was Naruto Uzumaki, Shinobi Konoha, and the future Hokage of their village. My knowledge of the future from the anime when I first came to this world didn't seem so important until I realized that the time was approaching. Orochimaru, the destruction of Konoha, the death of the third Hokage, all of it was supposed to happen today. I shook my head, trying to get rid of these thoughts. For now, everything was okay. I had to be with Naruto to support her. The streets were filled with people walking towards the arena. For them, it was entertainment, and for us, the moment of truth. Naruto was full of energy, despite her visible nervousness. She smiled, joked, and tried to lighten the mood over breakfast. But I could see that she was tense. Although her smile, although a little forced, still lit up everything around her. "Are you ready?" I asked when we reached the arena. She nodded, but then stopped, looking at me thoughtfully. "Aki, thank you for being with me, it gives me strength." I was embarrassed, but I smiled. "You can do it, Nara. I believe in it." I wanted to say more, but the words stuck in my throat. We reached the arena, and I felt the tension peak. It was all starting. And I couldn't help but think that this would be our last normal battle before the storm that would change everything. When Naruto entered the arena, her determination seemed tangible. The crowd fell silent, waiting for the fight to begin. Neji Hyuga was already standing in front of her, his face impassive, and his eyes cold. "You don't have a chance." His voice was even, but there was a hint of contempt. "Fate has already decided everything." Naruto smirked, crossing her arms over her chest. "And I don't believe in fate, Neji. I decide who I will be and what I will do. And today I will prove it." The fight began, and Neji immediately went on the attack. His techniques were fast and precise, each blow aimed at her weak points. But Naruto did not give up. She dodged, attacked with clones, tried to confuse him. Training with Jiraiya had changed a lot in her combat thinking. Simple, but no less annoying techniques, seemingly endless stamina, incredible pace and pressure. Neji was getting tired. He could not deal critical damage that could give him a full advantage. "Do you think this will change anything?" Neji shouted as her clones disappeared. "You don't stand a chance against the Hyuga." But Naruto just smiled. "Do you know how hard it is to become who you want to be when you're hated? When everyone thinks you're nothing?" She clenched her fists, her chakra flaring. "You know nothing about what that's like." Her scream echoed around the arena, and I felt tears welling up in my eyes. She was incredible. At one point, the chakra Naruto had changed. Her strength had increased, her blows had become more accurate, faster. I realized that she had used the power of the Kyuubi, and that was the decisive moment. One powerful and unexpected blow, a mistake by her opponent, and Neji was on the ground. The crowd roared. Naruto raised her hand up, her face shining with happiness. Her gaze found me in the stands. I applauded her loudly. She smiled at me, and this moment seemed perfect. The rest of the fights followed. Shikamaru, as always, acted cunningly and cleverly. His fight with Temari was intense, but he managed to win, using his shadow technique and an incredibly complex plan. However, as in canon, he gave up at the last moment, citing fatigue. The crowd was perplexed, but I understood him. He squeezed the maximum out of himself in this battle. There was no more need to demonstrate his skills. Kankuro refused to fight, which caused even more questions from the audience. Everything followed the chronology known to me. In the end, it was more strategy than cowardice. When it was Sasuke's turn, he was still not in the arena. The crowd was starting to whisper. Genma was about to declare Gaara the winner. But he came. Sasuke appeared in the center of the arena as if nothing had happened. His gaze was cold, determined. I saw him linger for a moment where Naruto was sitting, and he nodded at her. She smiled. Him, raising fist as a sign support.